Conservatives propping up the CBC. I'm Brian Lilly with the Rebel.media. Conservative MP and leadership candidate Brad Trost had a great idea. Let's sell CBC. But he went further than that. He tabled a private member's bill, Bill C-308, to try and get the job done. Called for it to be privatized over 3 years. Well, that bill has now gone down in a blaze of glory.
Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Yes. All those in favor of the motion will please say yea. Yay! All those opposed will please say nay. Yay! In my opinion, the nays have it.
The surprising thing from that is that there were several Conservative MPs that spoke out against this bill. We won't know until the beginning of May which ones vote for or against propping up the state broadcaster and their more than $1 billion a year subsidy. But what we do know is that Peter Van Loan, the Conservative Party's heritage critic, stood up and said it was official party policy to support the state broadcaster.
There are some very real questions that we as Conservatives have, but make it clear, make it understood by everyone that the party policy position is that we support a public broadcaster. We would just like CBC to play that role of a genuine public broadcaster, bringing our literature, bringing the theatre of Canada, bringing the music of Canada.
Now, as much as I disagree with Van Loan, and as revolting as I found his comments were, at least he offered some criticisms of CBC. Former CTV broadcaster turned Conservative MP Kevin Waugh from Saskatoon, he stood up and made it sound as if private broadcasters have never done a thing and that only CBC can hold this country together.
The CBC, with their distinct programming, excels at the educational component of helping Canadians learn about this country, showcasing Canadian culture, showcasing our art, our literature, our history, and probably most importantly, our geography. For an example, last summer, let's just take last summer, Madam Speaker, over 11 million people on a Saturday night turned into CBC to watch the concert, The Tragically Hip. They performed with lead singer Gord Downie.
Waugh sounded like such a liberal with those comments. You would have expected him to have one of those CBC lawn signs in the front of his yard come election time. I'm shocked at what he said, but like so many of his liberal friends who were supporting CBC, and like Van Loan as well, he stood up and he talked about that Tragically Hip concert, and they speak about it as if only CBC could have broadcast that. As if these people don't realize CBC won and outbid the others for the broadcast rights to that concert. That was a commercial enterprise. Any broadcaster could have put that together and brought Canadians coast to coast to coast. That is the simple reality of the thing. But these guys don't get it. And they speak as if by privatizing CBC, it will somehow shut it down, something that Brad Trost said is not the intent of this bill.
What I'm asking for today is members to endorse this bill, to have a vote so that we can discuss the principle of restructuring the CBC and making it private.
It's long past time the government got out of the business of owning a broadcaster. As I explained years ago in my book, CBC Exposed, it's not like we even actually needed CBC to be created. We already had Hockey Night in Canada as a national radio broadcast before CBC came into existence. CBC deterred the arrival of Canadian television by years due to their slow-moving and bureaucratic nature. It was even proposed and foisted upon the government, a Conservative government of R.B. Bennett, by a pair of socialists, and things haven't changed much. Look, we don't have a government bank. We don't have a government automobile maker in this country. We don't have a government food store. And as someone that relies on broadcasting to earn his living, I would argue that food is still more important to me than broadcasting. We wouldn't trust the government to run the grocery stores because we'd be left with nothing to eat, like in old days of Poland where people would show up for bread and find only vinegar on the shelves. Nobody's watching CBC these days. You can see that in their actual ratings. They don't have shows in the top 10 or even the top 30 very often unless they happen to have a good hockey game on that night. They lost the broadcast rights for Hockey Night in Canada to Rogers, and the National has been on a downward trend for more than 25 years. Look at this chart. So, isn't it time that we decided we don't need CBC on the government payroll anymore? As Trost said, this is not getting rid of it, it's selling it off, letting it sink or swim on its own merits. I think that the Conservative Party has to get with it. And we've been running our petition for a long time now, sellthecbc.ca. If you agree with me and you haven't signed on to that petition yet, I encourage you to do that. Sellthecbc.ca. But I also want you to do something else. I want you to tell Peter Van Loan that it's time to wake up and get with the Conservative base. The party needs to change its views on this. David Anderson, Conservative MP, read the same policy as Peter Van Loan and stood up and said, no, I disagree. The policy actually supports selling CBC, the party policy, that is. Arnold Vriesen, another Conservative MP from up by Edmonton, stood up and called for CBC to be sold off, even though he acknowledges that he loves many of their programs. They're not going to disappear. They're just going to be not on the public payroll anymore. So I want you to email Peter Van Loan. It's easy to do. You can see his email address across the bottom of the screen right now. It's peter.vanloan@parle.gc.ca. Tell him I sent you. Tell him he's got to get with the program. Tell him it's time for the Conservative Party of Canada to no longer support a broadcast entity that is so antagonistic not only to conservative ideals, the conservative movement, but to conservative-minded Canadians coast to coast. Email Van Loan now, peter.vanloan@parle.gc.ca, and sign our petition at sellthecbc.ca. If you like the Rebel video you just watched, never miss another one again. Click here to subscribe. And if you think you've subscribed already, make sure you subscribe to our Rebel Canada channel. It's new. You don't want to miss a thing. All the Trudeau news that's not fit to print.